And Israel is continuing its strikes on Hamas targets in Gaza. According to reports, Israel conducted overnight targeted raid with tanks in Gaza. The world leaders are making desperate attempts to stop the escalation. Meanwhile, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said in a televised statement that Israel is, and I'm quoting here, preparing for a ground invasion. He said that the decision on when forces would go into the Palestinian territory controlled by Hamas would be taken by the government's special war cabinet. Take a listen.
אנחנו ממטירים על החמאס אש תופת. כבר חיסלנו אלפי מחבלים, וזאת רק ההתחלה. במקביל אנחנו נערכים לכניסה קרקעית. אני לא אפרט מתי, איך, כמה. אני גם לא אפרט את מכלול השיקולים שאנחנו לוקחים בחשבון, שרובם הגדול כלל לא ידוע לציבור.
In the latest, the military said in a statement that Israeli ground forces operated within the northern Gaza Strip, attacking multiple Hamas targets before withdrawing. The Israel's army radio described it as the biggest incursion of the current war. In the latest, the White House has released a statement saying that U.S. President Joe Biden discussed the ongoing efforts to locate and secure the release of hostages with Prime Minister Netanyahu. Biden said that Israel has the right to respond to the October 7th Hamas attack and must do everything that it can do to protect the civilians. Biden also told a press conference that he did not demand that Israel should delay a ground invasion of Gaza. Take a listen.
What I have indicated to him is that if that's possible, to get these folks out safely, that's what he should do. It's their decision. But I did not demand it. I pointed out to him, if it's real, it should be done.
On the other hand, newly appointed U.S. House Speaker Mike Johnson has called up a resolution supporting Israel as his first act as leader of the U.S. House of Representatives. The non-binding measure reaffirms the U.S.'s commitment to Israel and calls on Hamas to immediately cease attacks and also release every hostage held by the militant group.
This resolution condemns Hamas and Iran for its support of terrorist groups, such as Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, while also calling for all sanctions on Iran to be fully enforced. So I urge my colleagues to support this important resolution. It will send a clear message across the world that terrorists and their sponsors will be held to account for their atrocities, their crimes against humanity, their crimes of genocide.
At the United Nations, Russia and China vetoed a U.S.-drafted Security Council resolution calling for pauses in hostilities to allow much-needed food, water and medicine to be supplied to the civilians in Gaza. Russia made a rival proposal that advocated a wider ceasefire, but it failed to win the minimum number of votes that was required. While Israel has meanwhile resisted both, arguing that Hamas would only take advantage and create new threats for the Gazans there. Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron has reaffirmed Israel's right to defend itself. He, however, added that he believes it would be an error for Israel to launch a massive ground intervention in Gaza. He's also announced that France is going to send a Navy ship to bring aid to hospitals in the Gaza Strip. Take a listen as to what Macron exactly said.
La France reconnaît le droit d'Israël à se défendre et à protéger ses populations. Mais elle le reconnaît dans un cadre qui est celui du respect des populations civiles. Et donc intervenir sur le plan terrestre, si c'est pour cibler des groupes terroristes de manière totalement identifiée.
And this comes as Hamas said that it launched a rocket on Wednesday towards the southern Israeli resort city of Eilat. This is some 220 kilometers from the Gaza Strip, and the Israeli military said that there had been an impact in an outlying area there. However, there was no immediate word of any casualties in what appeared to be the longest range attack of the Gaza war since October 7th. Meanwhile, in South Lebanon, residents are now fearful of a second front of the conflict escalating. Smoke rose on Lebanese hills near the border with Israel as a result of what appeared to be domestic mortar fire. The Israeli tanks and troops were stationed in the border area. As increased Israeli airstrikes continue to devastate parts of the Gaza Strip, these before and after satellite images on your screens right now, it reveals the extent of the damage caused by the daily bombings in northern Gaza. And joining me now on the broadcast from California, we have with us Alon Burstein. He's a visiting assistant professor and Israel Institute fellow at the University of California. Thank you so much for joining us yet again on WION, Mr. Burstein.
Thank you for having me. Good morning.
Good morning. Now, there's a lot of ambiguity on Israel's ground offensive. With Netanyahu in a televised address, he asked the IDF soldiers to be prepared. Now, if a ground offensive is launched, will it be a defiance against the United States of America's position in the ongoing war, where in the latest, Biden said that he did not demand Israel to delay a ground invasion and it was only a suggestion. What do you make of these statements made by Netanyahu and Biden?
So I think that President Biden has been trying to forestall Israel's ground invasion for two reasons. Number one is Qatar seems to be promising and so far delivering on the fact that they can pressure the Hamas movement to release hostages, at least possibly those with American citizenship or foreign nationality in general. And President Biden keeps on urging Israel to delay the ground invasion until more hostages are released. A second factor is this regional factor. There is Hezbollah, there's also militias in Yemen and in Iraq that have threatened to retaliate against the United States. The United States has so far moved 2 aircraft carriers, 2,000 Marines, deploying anti-missile batteries, anti-aircraft batteries, and the United States is telling Israel, wait until we can deploy as much as possible to protect our bases and our soldiers in the area. So that is why the United States is trying to forestall this invasion, and I think that that is really why Netanyahu today in his speech all of a sudden sounded a little bit differently. All of a sudden he said that our goals are also to remove Hamas from power, but also to release all the hostages, which in the first days of the war, he was not saying that. He was saying we're going to remove Hamas from power and destroy it, regardless of the hostage situations. I think that he's feeling the pressure to hold off for the hostages.
Right, Mr. Burstein. Now, like you mentioned, that Netanyahu has been talking about a much anticipated ground offensive in Gaza, and we've also seen tanks surround the Gaza border, and in the latest according to reports, Israel conducted overnight targeted raid attacks with tanks in Gaza, but Netanyahu has still not given a timeline as to when the offensive will take place. Why is that?
So right now, there is more and more urgency and disagreement within the Israeli cabinet regarding this ground offensive. The Israeli chief of staff, the military, has said, we're ready. We're ready to go. Israel has mobilized the largest mobilization that it has done in 50 years. There are 300,000 soldiers that have been drafted and are waiting to invade the Gaza Strip. The military is saying it's ready. And in the political establishment, in the cabinet, there's disagreements because Netanyahu is likely feeling the political pressure, but militarily, the army is ready to go. So that's the reason that he's holding off and sort of waiting right now to see what's happening. I will add also that there's growing concern in the international community that Israel has not thought out what's going to happen after it invades, after it theoretically removes Hamas from power. What comes next? Israel had a history before of having settlements in the Gaza Strip. No one in the international community wants to see that happen. Netanyahu has said that's not going to happen, but there are hawkish elements in his government who are making noise that maybe that will happen. And the world is really scared. That's another reason that today the EU and the United States have suggested, according to the Wall Street Journal, who are putting pressure on Israel, think about the day after. You're going to go in and you're going to invade. What's next? And I think that may be another reason that's holding off the invasion, with Israel trying to figure out what is next. Let's say they go in and manage to destroy the Hamas movement. What happens then in Gaza? I think that they're still trying to figure that one out.
Right, Mr. Burstein, you speak of how there are possible skirmishes between the IDF and Netanyahu government. But in the latest, Netanyahu clearly said in the same televised address we're talking about that the decision of a ground offensive in Gaza will be taken by the war cabinet.
So there's currently 2 cabinets operating in Israel. There's Netanyahu's original government that we spoke about several times over the last year, which is this hawkish right-wing government that does not have a lot of trust in the Israeli population. And then when the war started, Netanyahu joined with another political party and had two former chiefs of staff join into a smaller war cabinet, and both cabinets are running side by side. And Netanyahu is saying, we are going to make the decision in the war cabinet together. That's sort of an indication to the Israeli population saying, don't worry, the hawkish elements that no one really trusts, they're not going to be the ones to decide. The war cabinet will decide together when the time is right. But in reality, the war cabinet does not have the actual authority to order the invasion. It all comes back to Netanyahu, which is the reason Netanyahu himself is the one who's being heavily pressured by all these international leaders, because at the end of the day, he's the only member of the Israeli government who is in both cabinets, and he's the only one who can actually order the invasion.
Right. Thank you so much, Mr. Burstein, for joining us on WION and sharing your insights with us on this.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.